Hey, good morning, everybody, and happy Friday. Welcome to this week's long form episode on Mining Stock Daily, focusing on all things American mining here. And that's kind of been my theme this week, coming back from Boise, Idaho, in the Idaho Mining Conference earlier in the week. So, a lot of kind of ideas and questions back in my head. And I'm going to pose those questions to two guests, actually, in this episode. A big thank you to Chris Temple, National Investor, and also Adam Hawkins of Global External, a friend down in Arizona. And we're going to talk all things kind of where mining in the U.S. stands today, and big discussions with trade deals and obviously investment deals coming out of the federal government as well. So special thanks to those two, and great discussion here over the next 45-50 minutes. Also, thank you to our sponsors. I would like to thank Vizsla Silver, Equinox Gold, Revival Gold, and Integra Resources for continued support of Mining Stock Daily. We had a couple corporate updates here this week from some other partners, so please be sure to go back and listen to some of the editorial updates on some of the good work happening on the ground there. All right, let's jump into my conversation. Chris Temple, Adam Hawkins. Have yourself a great weekend, everybody. Happy Halloween, by the way. Be well. All right, everybody, welcome back to this week's long form episode on Mining Stock Daily. And it's going to be a good one because we're going to focus on all things the mining industry in the United States of America. I just came back from the Idaho Mining Conference in Boise earlier this week, so I got a lot of ideas spurring in the back of my head. And so I pulled in the cavalry here. Not only, I guess you can call it a twofer, not a two-segment episode, but two guests. We're bringing in Adam Hawkins from Global External, no stranger to the podcast, and also Chris Temple, National Investor, also no stranger to of the podcast. He's been with me for almost since day one. So, but these two gentlemen, we're, like I said before I press record, we're going to give it hell. It's great to see you both. Listen, I sat in and listened to a couple panels up in Boise on Tuesday, the day I was there. And there was one question that actually kind of stuck in the back of my head, which I think is good to maybe reflect to both of you. And the question that was asked in one of the panels was, is the United States of America a better jurisdiction for mining now than it was a year or two ago? And why or why not? Adam, I'm going to put that to you, the first one. You get the first go at it.
Well, geology doesn't really change. So having good geology is a good start. And we have, depending on what material you're looking for, we have some really, really good opportunities within this country. I think we are, and I think this goes for most places, getting a lot better about discovering resources where we may not have looked before, or at depths we haven't looked before. I think that makes a huge difference in terms of like the policy side. Yeah, it helps having a government that's encouraging of our industry to develop. I think there's a fair degree of uncertainty around the impacts of trade and tariff policy on construction costs, and especially when you're talking about, building a hard rock mine is not a small capital expenditure project. And you tend to have a lot of things coming in from a lot of places. So you want to have a pretty good idea about what your costing structure is going to be like. And these are turbulent times in that department. So I guess my shorthand to it would be it's a little column A, little column B. But overall, very encouraged about hearing uh, good things from a lot of the different agencies that we have to deal with.
Yeah. Chris, obviously we've seen some nice capital flows into U.S. companies and U.S. projects, which has been nice. I mean, most of 2025, we've seen that those valuations go to the upper right of the chart. So that's been nice to see. But just because you have capital doesn't mean things are all that easier. That just means there's a little bit more speculation coming into. What are you seeing from the investment side? Is the U.S. kind of back on track for for real capital, not just government capital, but real capital coming in?
Well, I think that there's some modest improvement. Yes, I pointed out in a few different contexts in recent months that I get all of the usual suspect emails and promotions from the investment banks, the ETF and mutual fund purveyors, and others. All of them offering, and I get multiples of these per week, guys. All of them offering continuing education credits, which you need if you're a registered investment advisor, a FINRA broker, whatever. And I would say now for the last couple of years or so, and it's increasing somewhat, that a quarter to a third of these have to do with commodities and with energy and with a lot of these themes. So, we had a lot of years where the coverage on Wall Street or Bay Street in Canada of all of the different extractive industries, mining, energy, and so forth, had gone down to damn near nothing because everything else was hot and nobody wanted to get involved in these things. So there's been some rebound in the positive coverage of these things. You hear more about it, especially when it comes to nuclear energy and a lot of the technology, and Trump's deals in this, real and imagine, both have helped to move that needle also. So yeah, there's been some more greater interest on the part of investors, but we still, generally speaking, are lacking the comprehensive kind of industrial policy that we need to rebuild these industries in a way that all of the sound bites are suggesting that the president and others want to do. It just, the MP materials was nice. The Ambler Road project is nice. Those are pimples on a flea compared to the size and scope of what we really do need.
Well, maybe let's talk about one specific headlines that hit earlier this week. And Chris, you and I have talked over the phone kind of about, the role of the government and Department of War coming in and taking equity positions. And, and Adam and I chatted about the same thing, I think, last time Adam was on the podcast as well. So I don't necessarily want to rehash that, but there was some significant news earlier this week, which I think is important for us to have a conversation and that's on the back of JP Morgan coming in for a 3% stake of Perpetua in the Stibnite project up in Idaho. I do not remember the last time a massive U.S. financial institution came in and actually took a stake in a hard rock mining project. I would love for somebody to tell me the last time that happened.
I don't know.
Because we have talked about the underinvestment into these projects by big institutions for moreover a decade, multiple decades probably. And this was the first big. So they're contributing $75 million into the Stibnite project. They're going to take a 3% stake. That is incredible. And I'm just kind of wondering if they're starting with Stibnite now, which has obviously been incredibly de-risked. What is there more of that to come here? Would the likes of JP Morgan's, would other institutions start kind of looking around the value chain in hard rock mining to take stakes?
Well, let me hit that quick. Maybe Adam,
Yeah, please.
Look, Morgan, Jamie Dimon has said that they're over 10 years, they've got a massive investment goal into U.S. critical materials and stuff like that. That's small potatoes, what they just put into Perpetua, compared to what they've said they intend to do over the next decade. And I think others are going to step up as well. But there's a massive caveat, in my opinion, where that is concerned. And it's great to see a private U.S. investment bank with, quote, its own money doing this, as opposed to President Trump turning the federal government into a private equity fund. And we can argue both sides of that. But the first time that we get a major comeuppance in the market and this daisy chain of all of these flim-flam AI investment announcements are revealed as being all hot air, and we have a very overdue drop in the stock market, maybe the cryptocurrencies, and a retrenchment, which again is a matter of math and gravity, is going to happen. Now I want to see, in the wake of that, Morgan continue with its game plan and some of the other people come up, because we know from history that when you have a broad market correction, investment in everything stops, at least for a while. It's sure as hell going to stop for what little bit in relative terms the Trump administration has done. That's going to be done for a while. So I like to see what Morgan is doing. I applaud them for that. I would much rather see, and you guys both know that this has been one of my pet gripes for a while. I would much rather see a national infrastructure bank or some massive thing that's done off the federal budget's books that is immune from politics and frankly would be immune somewhat from a broad market drop that'll hit private investment. I would rather see something like that, be the leader of the massive kind of investment that we need going forward, because we're in a lot of trouble with all of these critical metals and made in America initiatives. If we have a broad market correction, you can kiss it all goodbye for a while.
Yeah, I was gonna throw in on the National Infrastructure Bank if you didn't put the plug in there, Chris. But uh, I am like my colleague here, very much a fan of that concept of trying to create uh, a I should say a politic or a partisan politic immune system to try and just kind of create a system to put money into places that conventional financial institutions don't, or where the business case for it isn't as compelling as perhaps other sectors that they're looking at. I will tell you without what I can tell you without betraying any client confidentiality here, that some banks, like the bigger American banks, have standards that they have to uphold before they can invest in a particular industry. That doesn't necessarily preclude them from finding a way for that capital to make it into there, and they usually do it through, investing in other entities that can invest in it based on, just kind of where their standards and their appetite is. But I think what really has changed profoundly is I think a lot of the folks that have looked at this as like a dirty industry are starting to think twice about that and starting to understand the impact of that NIMBY decision making process. And this is really more of indicative of what kind of led us to this point. Because if you look back to the history of this country, after World War II, we were really in the United States in a unique position to provide a lot of the materials and a lot of the manufactured goods that the world needed to recover from one of the worst periods of modern human history. We went from there to this belief that we didn't want the factories, we didn't want the mines, we didn't want all of this stuff that was perceived of as dirty, and that we could farm it out to somewhere else, far away from here, and there would be no consequences to that decision. Well, I'm sure that one of the popular terms right now is FAFO. We're in the FO period of that, and I think some folks that's really starting to resonate, that there are consequences to it. And if you're somebody who cares deeply about the environment, about the stead of the planet, and about leaving planet Earth better than you found it, and you realize that China every year produces more greenhouse gas and more CO2 than the entire Western Hemisphere combined,
Yep.
you can realize that the impact of farming all that stuff out has really, really put us in a pickle. And clawing back from that is not something that's easy. And the last thing I'll kind of throw here, and one of the reasons why China has been able to do what they've done here is that they can think in long-term political cycles. They're not having to do things in 2-year, 4-year patterns, 8 years potentially. They're thinking in 30-year terms because they just don't have the political realities that we do. What really will make it change here, what we really need to make it change, is to stop making mining a partisan issue. It's not a partisan issue. I don't care whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent. You use mine materials every single day. We rely on them, and we ought to care about where they come from.
One of the conversations I had on a panel actually in Boise, and I had to kind of preface what I did say, saying it's going to be popular with some and very unpopular with some in the room. And I talked about just the time decay of investment capital coming into the sector when it's being held up with permitting and litigation on the back of permits. And I think obviously we continue to hear of projects that get the go-ahead approval from the feds, and then basically 10 minutes later there's knocks on the door with lawsuits from a number of NGOs, trying to do anything that they can to stop it, because that's how they make business. And I said, who benefits from ongoing permitting holdups, and that's the lawyers on both sides. And I had a few people, they were not happy with me, and I had a very lovely woman say, some of those lawyers are there defending the companies, on the back of that. And I said, I absolutely agree, but who's paying for those billable hours? The investors, people that provide the capital. And so it goes both ways here. And so that kind of led to the question, are we hearing any sort of discussion on any sort of tort reform, or trying to figure out how to make the permitting process easier, not for the federal say, but at least to mitigate the amount of lawsuits that can come down the pipeline, following the approval or non-approval process from the federal government. Adam, you got a pretty good ear to Washington. Are you hearing anything of the like?
I mean, how do I?
It doesn't sound good.
I mean, all right. So the basic function of the 535 elected members of our legislative branch is to pass a budget that keeps the government running, and we're in a position where we can't even do that, where they can't even do, their basic function. Okay. And I believe this to be true. I may be off by like one or two, but 177 members between the House and the Senate have law degrees. All right. So, you guys are good at math. You understand the stats on that. You're going to ask that group of people to pass reforms that inhibit lawyers' ability to be able to make money. I hate to be cynical. And by the way, I believe I've heard from the same person who filled your ear on the lawyer. And in full disclosure, my father is a lawyer. My mom's been in the legal field. Like, I come from a long line of people who have an appreciation for the practice of law. I mean, no disrespect to folks who have law degrees and practice law, but yeah, our system in this country is bonkers. Everyone you talk to who's outside of the United States, who's familiar with our system here, and is also familiar with systems in other places, whether it be Canada, Australia, Chile, they tell us we're unhinged, and it's absolutely true. Uh, do we need to do something about it? Absolutely. Are we going to do something about it? Highly unlikely.
Chris, you got anything to add to that?
Well, I think the only exception to that, I generally agree with Adam. In fact, when we were at that conference, Better in Our Backyard, a few weeks ago, he and I, for prop, should have had metal buckets full of ice water, because everybody is there, rah rah, gee, Trump signed all these executive orders, we won. We didn't win a damn thing yet. There's a lot of work to do. But they have at least, and this actually, I think, to be fair, happened over a year ago under President Biden. They did limit some of the time windows legislatively, in which there can be certain kinds of lawsuits to hold up a project. But, by and large, though, the system is still, and this is one of the reasons why there's been such disincentive for investment in this industry. Who wants to run this gauntlet for years and years? I was on a podcast yesterday of one of the people I also met in the Twin Cities. His audience is mostly people in the energy industry. And I reminded him, I said, it's been literally a quarter of a century since yours truly first set foot on a North Met project in northern Minnesota. And there it still sits. Good example.
Yeah. There is a lot of, I think, speculation going on in the market right now, Chris, on the back of these equity positions by the U.S. government. Everybody's wondering, okay, where's the next domino to fall? Where can I place my chips? And it's almost, you're playing U.S. natural resources roulette to figure out where the black's going to hit next, right? Like PolyMet, I've heard Talon, I've heard Energy Fuels, like all these specific companies. And on the cover of it, completely makes sense. I totally get it. But is that really a sound investment strategy waiting for the next announcement to come out of the DOW of where they're going to place capital?
Well, it's not. And there's a lot of examples of why, and Lithium Americas is a perfect one. You know, I was at the Mines and Money conference in Miami late last winter, so like in February or so. And they had a guy from the energy department there, and it had just come out in the news that the final approval had been rendered for, I think it was a $2.33 billion loan guarantee from the energy department that had been negotiated a few years prior by the Biden administration, and with the shove as well from General Motors, who's in, for a good number in that Thacker Pass project as well. And I asked the guy afterward, when it wasn't in front of the whole room, I found a delicate way to ask them, do you guys have any lender's remorse at all? Because who would want this project today? The science has passed you by, the lithium market is in the dumps. And if you were looking at this project as an investor fresh today in February 2025, there's a lot of lithium stuff that you would decide to put your money into besides this. So it astounded me in a way when we were all together in the Twin Cities almost a month ago, when everybody is thinking, oh, goody, Trump just bought stock in Lithium Americas. Yeah, because he couldn't get completely out of the deal. He didn't like the loan guarantee, and he twisted whoever's arm he had to say, we're going to give you less money, and I want some of it in equity. So I don't think that, and the reason for that answer, guys, is that it goes to show that the government doesn't always have the soundest geological project or economic project in mind when it decides what to invest money in. Ambler Road. Which one of the president's buddies, and this is no reflection, I'm just speaking out, off the top of my head, which one of the president's buddies is now a big shareholder in Trilogy? John Paulson. Okay. Who is also helping him carry water to try and primary Thomas Massey from Kentucky, who's the only member of the House of Representatives that believes all the MAGA rhetoric. Okay. So, all right. So now we're going to invest in Trilogy. Now we're going to, speed up the permitting process and build the Ambler Road thing. So a lot of this is still way too much politics, in my opinion. Are you going to get lucky once in a while and stumble across a project that the government does put money in? Yes. But I think we're getting too optimistic over just waiting to see what the Defense Department or the War Department, forgive me, or the Energy Department decide to invest in. Not that those things aren't important, not that some of this stuff shouldn't be done. But again, we need to be having our eye on pushing a much larger and more comprehensive industrial policy, and still looking at what's sound economically. I mean, we all can rattle off projects, whether it's gold, copper, rare earths, or whatever, that are superior economically and geologically both, that may never get any federal money.
I may push back on you a little bit because I think President Trump might be the first president ever to approve a project twice.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
With
he
the
did it the
Ambler Road.
first time when it got right.
I don't know anybody who's had to approve a project twice from
Right,
the
yeah,
presidential
that's true.
from the Oval Office. That's really. Adam, what do you think?
It's
What do you think?
it's history. It's history being made for sure.
You've got a
Because of
number
all time, no
of
one's ever seen it before.
Adam, you work with a number of companies on the development stage of things, and listen, these companies, they're always looking for a new pool of capital because that's the way their business is run. They need to raise money to spend money to develop projects. What are you hearing from the corporate side? Are there companies that are like maybe over promotional and President Trump's incentive is to keep, resource development moving forward. And so we're in conversation with Washington about potential, funds to help us out. Is that happening way too frequently?
So there's always going to be in the junior sector a fair number of projects that are building on hype. Chris knows who we all have a few that pop into our head when I say that, and we all know that there's some folks, especially in the junior sector, who are like absolutely amazing at arm waving, but there's not a whole lot behind it. So there are a lot of junior projects where you do have really good fundamentals, and maybe some of it just kind of gets lost in the cloud of the other stuff. At the large company level, um, every company that we've done business with has a certain resource and risk profile, and they're looking for things that just kind of that fit within those guardrails. Some have a greater appetite for geopolitical uncertainty, um, and others don't. For the ones that are looking for, to minimize geopolitical risk and increase continuity of asset retention, the United States is a very appealing jurisdiction. So long as you're staying out of the sections of the country where your tenure is tied to a revocable instrument. I think we all know what part of the country I'm talking about. When you have your shovel in the ground and you've made your capital investment, if you continue to operate within the terms of your permit and be a responsible miner, you can mine it for the economic life of the project. I think that still brings capital in, and keeps people interested. I don't see as much of the arm waving on the big corporate side, but certainly I see some promoters, who are not ones that I think would be the ones to actually develop a project. They'll go out and I'm seeing a lot of this right now. I won't pick on anybody by name, but trying to get investor interest in a project through a letter of interest from the Exim Bank, which is, I mean, my understanding of that is that's like when I get a credit card offer from Amex. Like, I mean, I could press release that too.
Sure.
And I mean, some people may think that's newsworthy. I don't. But
You don't think that's new? Because I think a lot of people, maybe some novice, would look at that and say that's actually very material. But it's not that big of a deal.
it's not the same as committed capital. It
Yeah.
isn't. And I mean, like I know I'm going to get some hate mail for saying that. I do.
Yeah.
But I think it needs to be said.
Fair enough. Oh, that's very interesting. Actually, I think my jaw dropped a little bit right there, Adam. So you good job. Very very provocative. I wanted to ask you both, and it is a little bit of a curveball of a question, just to transition a little bit. But the relationship between the U.S. and Canada right now is really strange and dynamic. It really feels like a failure on all sides, to be quite honest with you. This should have been one of the easier things to be done. If the trade relationship needed to be renegotiated, it seems like that would have been the easiest one to get done. And maybe not. Maybe I'm being naive here, just given the current case and the partisanship that we see, over the borders. That continues here as in the World Series with the Blue Jays. In the series leading on the Dodgers. So it's like we can't even escape it in sports. But here we are. Is there, there's so much capital flow between borders and resource development. Obviously, the Canadian markets historically are the most, pronounced in the resource development, but they've been on the struggle. They've been struggling for a number of years. A lot of Canadian companies coming in and getting listings on the New York Stock Exchange because of meaning more liquidity there. But do these Canadian companies or Canadian management teams working in the U.S. and vice versa, is there, challenges ahead of them just due to this politicalness that we have between the Trump administration and the Carney administration?
My view, frankly, is that a lot of the stuff in the headlines, especially when the president doesn't like an ad featuring former President Reagan, and he's going to add 10% to the tariffs on Canada, it's become cartoonish. And, look, long term, I think that the president understands, and savvy investors do as well, that as things evolve, we are going to have a more fractured globe. Things are going to be sourced closer to home. His vision of the Don Road doctrine of tying up at least the northern hemisphere, or the northern part of the Western hemisphere, I think is where we're heading. And, yeah, it seems politically tenuous, and the president changes his mind frequently on so many things. But don't forget the fact that he and Mark Carney have a considerable history together, largely through the president's in-laws by marriage, Jared Kushner's folks specifically. And look, and that was underscored in just the last few days by what? By the Cameco US and Brookfield deal and Westinghouse. Okay. So there is still an awful lot of investment and good stuff being done underneath the silliness of the US Canada relationship, which I don't have as much long term concern over as others do. I think it's going to get sorted out.
The only solution to um, to material security, to mineral security, is at the very core of it a North American partnership. There are certain things that we can't source here, or we cannot smelt, refine, produce secondary, tertiary production that really do rely on a strong partnership between the three countries. I would love to see a day and age where we had all three unified by folks who want to roll up their sleeves and figure out how we solve a lot of the complex problems. Closer for me to home as a fifth generation Arizona native, is figuring out how we solve some of our complicated issues on our southern border, um, principally of which, uh, where we can bring greater security to our trade understanding and uh, our I'm trying to find the right word for this, but the way that we partner on commerce, I think will have a lot of downstream impacts to it.
Yeah.
I've watched the border get politicized over and over again. And if you talk to folks like some of my cousins who have property on both sides and have been cattle ranching in the area prior to the Gadsden purchase, um, you realize that this is a lot more complicated than you can put into a soundbite on MSNBC or Fox News. And I watch both sides try to politicize it. And the reality of it is it's complicated. We need to deal with it. But ultimately, one of the best ways we can get after it is to find ways to create unilateral trade understandings. I think that's going to be difficult with the current administration in Mexico. I mean, I'm open to be proven wrong. We're going to have the USMCA discussions happening here in Arizona in a few weeks. So fingers crossed, we all roll up our sleeves and come up with a good solution.
Can I,
Adam, correct me.
not that I want it.
Pardon me, Trev.
Sorry, Chris.
But Adam, in a recent past, I think that Mexico's president has done a few things really without the kind of pressure and bloviating that Trump has used against Canada, that really are aligning her more with the U.S. I mean, she's adopted a lot of the measures to try and stop the backdoor smuggling of, products from China into the U.S. to escape tariffs and things like that. So I think that under the right circumstances, maybe she's more on board with this tripartite strengthening. Don't you?
In a general sense, yes, and I don't disagree with what you said. I do not see her and her administration really uh, bellying up to our industry. And a lot of what they've done since day one has been kind of in the opposite direction. I mean, look, some people can find religion on this stuff. They can take a hard steer in the opposite direction. I think especially those who are running for a national elected office who maybe don't have a firm appreciation of everything in the weeds might just kind of grab a political morsel and run with it. But in terms of where things have gone in Mexico, there have been some stuff at the provincial level that's encouraging, but at the national level, I would, I would, it's been discouraging. I wish it were different.
Adam, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the southern border, and I don't really want to get into a big philosophical discussion on immigration, but what we're seeing right now is far from reform, but it is a massive shift in policy and tactics over the last year. But I'm just, we've seen the videos. We not that I want to share much opinion about it, but I'm just curious if that is having any sort of implication on labor and employment within the mining and resource industry where you're from in Arizona. Are you hearing anything about people being able to show up for work, not showing up for work, or being able to find the labor that when companies need to find it at all?
So I can't speak for the agricultural, the tourism industry, the restaurant business. I think those folks would probably have a much better window into this than we do. Um, we struggle to, with skilled and unskilled trade positions, keep everything running. We have, when it comes to workforce, we kind of have a two-pronged fork here. You have operations that are close enough to municipalities that you have a bigger pool of workforce to pull from, but you also have a bigger pool of employers going after the same workforce. When you're getting into rural areas, you have a much smaller pool, the ability to like kind of attract folks to come out there and work at these operations, especially those that are quite remote, can be challenging. I don't know if we're the best barometer as an industry of that. I would probably point you towards the folks who are producing lettuce and strawberries and cotton and whatnot. They may have a better read of it. In a perfect world, we would have an immigration system that would provide for a good combination of kind of paths to work and being able to allow folks who have good intentions to be able to come here and pursue the same dream in this country that my ancestors did. But how you get there, that's the that's the rub. And what I would tell anybody who wants to talk about, the U.S. Mexico borders, go and talk to people who like live along it, who live out there, who are like within 5-10 miles of where that border is. And, I think I think you're gonna get a much more realistic picture of it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, since we've now solved philosophical questions as far as immigration, let's turn to something easier, and that'd be China. Chris, there was big. We're recording this Thursday morning. News out of Korea this morning was there's a deal, I guess, between China and the United States. I'm looking at this thing, Chris, and I'm just like, this looks like a can kicking maneuver here. My thoughts, my opinion. Trump's going to remove 10% of the China tariffs from 57% to 47%. Still a pretty meaningful tariff. China is going to pull back on some of the fentanyl trade. I guess that's good news, although it doesn't solve that problem. And then they put a pause on rare earth export curbs for one year. Now, then maybe if we just focus on the rare earth export controls, because that's was really driving that rare earth speculation we've seen in the last month or two. 1 year. This could be something China next week decides to pull the rug on. very possibly could. And it also, I think it also maybe benefits the Trump administration a little bit because now that squeeze on rare earths is less prevalent and allows them another year to really work on an actual strategy of resupplying and reshoring this stuff. So just given the headlines, those kind of the headlines from this deal, what were your thoughts this morning?
Well, you get all of my scribblings and newsletter and so forth, so you know that going back a month ago, I was saying that we should start taking some profits on some of the more extreme cases of the big moves in rare earths and some of the embargoed metals because there was going to be some kind of a ceasefire. And it pretty much came out as the reports had said and so forth. And look, long term, it doesn't change anything. We are still in what I've long called a World War III over commodities and currencies, and it's a long-term war which the U.S. has been losing and is frankly still losing. Because again, the Trump administration, and it's because of some of the institutional things like we've all discussed in this conversation, we bring a water pistol to a gunfight. Adam mentioned the long-term planning that China engages in, which we don't do because of our nature and because of the institutions that we have, and not in a good sense. So, it buys everybody some time. China needed to take some of the heat off because it's having a lot more trouble right now, much more so than Jerome Powell at the Fed, of keeping its debt colossus from imploding. Which would cause all kinds of problems in China. So they needed a little bit of a release valve themselves. And we needed to buy some time, as you said, on the rare earths. A year is not going to be enough. 10 years is not going to be enough to put everything in place that we need to do. But it gives everybody some time. And I hope the Trump administration on that particular subject, Trevor, is going to seize the moment and not get lazy over this pause of the embargoes, but redouble our efforts to replace this, which we need to do long term anyway. And so now we've got a little bit of ease. Professor Steve Hanke is a great libertarian economist, not Republican or Democrat, one of the smartest people I know and follow. He's pointed out, and I no hyperbole, that if China wanted to really do it, they could bring us to our knees in 6 to 9 months. And they were in the process of doing that over the rare earths. I mean, you've had some individual manufacturers in the U.S. talk about supply chain issues, having to stop production, curtail production. And Europe has come right out and admitted that they're screwed. They really are, because they're more willing than Trump is to admit just how dependent we've become on China for this.
Yeah, China is every time we kind of announce some of these steps that we're taking kind of incrementally to move towards supply chain recapture, I think they're all having a good laugh at us. I mean, because this is, like this is going to take a lot in a lot of different areas, and they've got us so lapped on in so many different categories. So, like, if you want to get into the conversation about like material processing, China is now paying folks to ship them copper concentrate. Like it was bad enough when they were like, when the government was absorbing like the loss of it. Now they're paying people to send it over there. Like, and we're sitting around going, well, we're working on, shortening our time frames for NEPA. And so like, like, I don't know what it's gonna like. I don't know what pivotal moment in the history of this country is gonna take for the general populace to wake up out of their lifestyle inflicted coma and realize that we have to do serious steps to try it and right this. And really at the core of it, if our government isn't there investing in some of these areas where the economics just don't support it, we're getting nowhere. So
Right.
number one, and National Infrastructure Bank would be great. If we could just find a way to get more money into the riskier points of exploration and resource identification, if we could start pulling things together to prop up our smelter infrastructure. In 1979, there were 19 operating smelters in this country. Today, there are 2. Like, so, all right, we got to get there. And then finally, we've got to do something about investing in our research and academic institutions that are working on material science, metallurgy, processing technology, resource recapture opportunities, where we're not losing that talent out the other side to the Thousand Talents Initiative in China. So like we really do need something that kind of pulls all of this back together, and we need it kind of unified. The one thing that we have different in this country that most of the other mineral producing countries have is they have a ministry of mines or a minister of mines. We don't. We have all of these different agencies that kind of cut this thing up into different portions, and you know, you kind of have to just rely on all of these things coming together. So really, if we could find a way to sort of centralize that, I think that would start to put us in a better stead.
I'm going to wrap this up with some very positive news, actually. One that caught me by surprise that I learned this week in Idaho. University of Idaho opening up a geological engineering school, which is the first new, basically mining geological school to come back into the books.
Nice.
That is wonderful news. So I applaud the University of Idaho and their partners in getting that up and going. I know it was something that was probably not easy to do, but absolutely necessary. And I just think that is a breath of fresh air that, you know, it's one of many that needs to happen, but it's a step in the right direction. So
For sure.
very, very cool. Yeah.
I applaud them, and it will be a great second opportunity for those who don't get into University of Arizona.
Or the Colorado School of Mines. and much love to the South Dakota School of Mines as well, and Montana Tech. Well, you know, we can't leave them all that. I mean,
New Mexico.
we can name all like what,
Sure.
8 of them, 9 of them. So
Yeah.
all right, everybody.
And China has how many? Yeah.
a lot. All right.
See, there
Chris
you go. You brought us up, Trevor, on a high note, and I threw here's my bucket of cold water.
All right, always a pleasure to talk to you. Chris Temple, National Investor, Adam Hawkins, Global External, and thank you so much, both of you, for your time in doing this, and look forward to seeing you probably some sort of conference or convention here down the road.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Trevor. Always a pleasure.